Today, we have Hilary Huffman here with us on the Wanderlust Wealth Show. I'm so excited. Hilary is one of my friends from New Orleans who is also just an incredible both real estate investor and traveler, and I cannot wait to share her story with you. So Hilary has actually flipped her way to financial freedom one house at a time while traveling the world. Like, truly incredible. So excited to have you, Hilary. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Olivia. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so excited for you to be here. Literally the first interviewee on the show. So super exciting.
Yes. And this is actually my first ever podcast interview. So
oh my gosh.
I'm very excited.
That makes me incredibly happy. Okay. Well, so Hilary, I just want you to give the listeners here just a little bit of background about yourself. How did you even get started? Why are you here?
It's funny because when people ask me this question, typically my response is I kind of accidentally flipped a house, which is really how it worked out. So I went to college in Manhattan, which, as many are aware, the rent is so expensive. And the job, my former corporate job that I landed out of after I graduated college, required me to relocate to India. And I still had a lease on my apartment that most people, when they're just graduating college, like they have roommates in Manhattan. I did not. So I had this really, really hefty lease. I was living on the Upper East Side. I had like this large 1-bedroom apartment. Honestly, at the time, I live below my means now. Back then, I wasn't as smart. And so here I was. I had to relocate to another part of the world. I was still stuck in my lease, and I just felt like I was hemorrhaging money. And because of all of the restrictions in New York, it's not like I could offset that expense with, say Airbnb or anything like that. And I just thought, oh my gosh, this is such a drain. Something has to give. And even so, I had worked in India a while, and then I knew moving forward that the job that I had at the time, which was as a software consultant for this huge company, I was going to have to travel to job sites every single week. So, and I could live anywhere in the country, and yet I was choosing to live somewhere that was very, very expensive. And having been from New Orleans, I knew, okay, well, I may not move back there full time, but it would be nice to have a little piece of real estate, even if I'm only there on weekends when I'm not working at my job. And so once my lease was up, after I'd moved back from India, once my lease was up, broke that lease, and I found a property on the MLS that had been listed for almost 540 days. I found it online in the French Quarter. And frankly, at the time, it was all I could afford, but anyone could have had it. Like anyone could have bought it. It had been sitting on the MLS. It was beyond a stale listing.
How much was it?
It was $145,000.
Oh my gosh.
Quarter,
wonderful.
which is unheard of. That thing has easily quadrupled in value. I wish I still owned it, but I didn't. So me knowing nothing about real estate, only knowing that, well, I might as well try to buy something and not be paying rent, especially rent in New York. Got it under contract. I found it online. I decided I wanted it without even seeing it. I didn't even have an agent that I worked with. It was a dual agent situation. I used the listing agent to represent me as well. I mean, I knew nothing at the time. But that being said, I got it under contract. And the day we had it appraised, it had already appraised for $67,000 more than I had it under contract for.
Oh my gosh. What a steal. That's incredible. Okay, I want to, before we move on, there's like so much to unpack here. So let's go back a little bit here. So number one that I wanted you to mention is like, when you first got out of college and got your corporate job, you were very much not living below your means. I 100% feel that, because I remember I didn't really, even though I had a master's in literally engineering and technology management, I had no real like understanding of how much it actually costs to live in the real world as a human being, right? They just like don't teach you how expensive life can be. And so I remember my rent wasn't even that expensive because I'd moved to New Orleans. I was paying like $1,800 a month. I can't even imagine how much you were spending in New York. But even then, I was just like, why am I spending so much on rent, which is taking away most of my paycheck? And they're like, this is ridiculous.
I know. It's crazy. And it's interesting because, the apartment I had in school and, as I had started my job, that it was certainly more than I should have been paying. Beyond that, though, I've always been a very, very frugal person. But I just knew that it wasn't going to be sustainable long term. And the big thing for me, it's like, all right, my job allows me to work anywhere because I'm flying to different clients every week. I'm choosing to live in one of the most expensive cities that I love. However, I mean, I could be living in the middle of nowhere, paying like $500 in rent if I wanted to, and still be making the same amount of money. So that was the thing. That was really kind of something that sunk into me. I'm like, all right, my peers are making X, I'm making, the same, but their cost of living is so much less than mine. And I just thought, why? Because especially on top of that, if I am never there, if I am maybe spending 4 nights a month in an apartment, like that was just crazy. It felt like such a drain. I've never been happier to break out of a lease in my life.
Yeah, completely. And I love that you say that because I talk to a lot of either people who have remote jobs or, there's so many people who are traveling nurses now. You've got a lot of different opportunities for that. But what I've seen is they still have an attachment to where their house is going to be, right? But if you're traveling so much, in my opinion, it really does not matter. Right?
It doesn't. Like,
you're never there anyway.
I know. And like, what's more important almost is like, access to an airport for me because that was such a part of my life. I mean, I took 4 flights a week, every single week for nearly 3 years. I mean, that's a lot of commuting time. And I mean, even living in Manhattan, getting to any airport, there's 3 in the area, but it takes a very long time. So that too, I mean, it was just eating into so much of my day. And it just wasn't I didn't see myself continuing with the really expensive rent. It just felt like I was throwing money away and it just didn't make sense at the time. So
completely. And that's why I always recommend to anyone who's either in consulting or even engineers who have to go offshore a bunch, anyone who travels a lot for their job, buy real estate, rent it out when you're traveling. It's such a great way to do it,
Absolutely. Okay.
So the other thing I just wanted to quickly touch on, you said that you bought your property sight unseen, dual agent, like how, right? Like how did you even get the confidence to do that?
So I did end up seeing it in person during the inspection period and all of that. Because my mother at the time was still living in New Orleans. So I would fly down to visit family on occasion. Now, how did I have the confidence? That is a great question. I just knew I grew up part of the time in the French Quarter, and I know how valuable that pocket of New Orleans real estate is. And the fact that I saw something, I mean, mind you, it was a 3rd floor walk up. It was not huge, it was, the reason I got it for a great price is because, let's be honest, it looked like a fishing camp. Like no one had lived there in years. Like it was not cute, but I knew it was so cheap for the area. And I'm like, this is a rock solid investment, no matter. And I didn't intend on flipping it. That was my primary, right? Just as you teach, I got an FHA loan. I had the W-2 job. I had never purchased a property before. I was 22 years old within the year, it was like my Christmas present to myself because I closed on December 27th. I believe, of that same year that I graduated college. And I just knew that I could make it work. And one thing I'll say, at the time, I didn't know what I didn't know because I had never read any sort of real estate book, I hadn't listened to any podcast. I hadn't done any research. When I tell you, I knew nothing. I knew absolutely nothing. So I was just delusionally optimistic that everything would work out. And I mean, I'm fortunate that it did, but I just kind of was naive. And so I
Yeah.
wasn't caught in this whole analysis paralysis. What sort of strategy do I use? I feel like nowadays in the world of sort of information overload, when people are looking to start investing or taking that leap of faith, making that like first big, jump into getting into real estate investing nowadays, it's so confusing. Like, I can't even imagine if I was on social media. I mean, back then, remind you, this is in 2012. Back then, Instagram stories weren't even a thing. Like, reels didn't exist. Like, all of this content that is pushed at us nowadays, it wasn't a thing back then.
Yeah.
So I was just sort of blissfully unaware of all the things that could go wrong.
I love that. I love that. But that's the thing is people get so stuck in analysis paralysis because there's almost too many options out there. And it really, at the end of the day, real estate really is simple. You buy a house, right? Like ideally a little bit undervalued. You hold on to it for a little while. If you don't want to hold on to it for a little while, you just improve it to increase the value of it, and then you sell it at a higher price. Like There's not much more to it. You're going to have a mortgage on it. If you can get the mortgage covered and expenses, you're good. Like that is the general basics around real estate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's funny because at the time, right, having been living in New York, and even though I was making a salary like now, I mean, I had been in school, and it's so hard to save in such an expensive city. And I mean, really, I bought that condo not only because it was all I could afford. I mean, when I tell you, I think at the time I put 5% down with an FHA loan, but I had the seller cover, like help with closing costs, all of it. Like I literally scrounged together the tiniest bit of money. I looked at the closing docs the other day, and coming to the table, I had to come out of pocket a little under $8,000.
Oh my gosh.
And then I realized after that appraisal, I'm like, wow, there's something to this. And then I, lived in the space for a little bit after spending my weekends that I would fly back to town doing all of the DIY myself because frankly, I had no more money to pay and outsource for all of these things. So here I am, painting on a Saturday night at 1 a.m. while all my friends are out drinking, like that was life. But that's okay because I knew I was working towards something bigger and something better. So I ended up selling that property because it was small. It was like all open concept, like a loft space. There was absolutely zero storage. It would be great for someone just like as a little crash pad, but as a primary residence, it wasn't really fitting my needs anymore. So then I took that money and rolled it into a different, larger home that I then house hacked while I was traveling. So,
okay, tell me more about that house hack.
So, I guess this is another example of not necessarily living within my means. I bought the most expensive house I could qualify for.
Oh my God.
I bought this large, so I went from, roughly, I think 700 square feet to this 2,300 square foot home uptown with like 14-foot ceilings. It felt gigantic to me at the time. And it was only a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, but it felt very, very big. And the layout was conducive to renting out the rooms. And I actually didn't initially have that thought, but I soon realized when you have a single family home that's built in the 1800s, expenses come up.
Yeah.
And even though I was doing okay at my job, my mortgage, the insurance, the taxes, I mean, everything and unexpected expenses, they started to stress me out. So I rented out 2 of the bedrooms furnished to people that were either coming to town for work, a lot of study abroad students that were like going to grad school at Tulane or what have you.
So how were you finding these like students or people who were coming into town? Was it Airbnb at the time or was it something else? Oh my gosh.
we were talking a while ago. Okay. Like I think I found most of my tenants on Craigslist.
Okay, this is the thing though. Okay, because people get so worked up, right, around like, oh my gosh, how am I going to find tenants? Well, people have been doing this for years. There are so many people out there looking for a place to stay. There's always people out there looking for a place to stay. You don't need fancy things like Airbnb. Like Airbnb is great. It's made it super convenient, and Furnish Finder. But there are so many other platforms out there where you can find tenants.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some people might laugh at this, but I mean, back then, I think I had certainly heard of Airbnb, but I wasn't going the short-term rental route. Honestly, another thing is that I was gone for sometimes weeks at a time, and I did not like coming home to a completely empty house that had been untouched because it was in an area of Uptown that was appreciating, but I took a gamble. Okay,
Totally.
you know what I mean? But so that was another thing. I liked the fact that I had not only the additional income to offset my living expenses, but just to have a little activity around the property. As like a single female, I felt good about that. But to this day, I still sometimes find tenants on like for my midterm rentals on Craigslist. And I mean, because not everybody knows what Furnished Finder is. A lot of people think of Airbnb and they think of vacations. They don't think of stays beyond 30 days.
Yep.
And so, Craigslist, people can think what they want of it, but I've found some phenomenal tenants through that platform.
I love that. I love that. I also love that you said you took a gamble on your area, because I kind of felt the same way when I purchased my duplex, right? Because it's kind of in the up and coming part of New Orleans. And if you know, New Orleans changes from block to block very quickly. But I just saw the potential and saw what was happening around it. And my gut just said, I think it's a good idea. Like, worst case scenario, you move,
Absolutely. No, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And I mean, I still apply that sort of take a gamble philosophy with many of my flips, which is why I'm able to provide an accessible and attainable price point for a turnkey renovated property, that's targeted towards first-time home buyers. Because honestly, in this particular market, there isn't a lot that is under $500,000 that's renovated in areas that people want to live. So where I flip and find like my largest margins are on those blocks that are up and coming, because oftentimes that particular buyer is just like you and I, they are in the back of their mind thinking, this is going to go up in value. So not only does it work out for me, but it works out for them in the long term. So it's truly a win-win.
No, I love that. So this actually is such a great segue into, okay, so you're working your corporate job, you've got a few properties. Now you're obviously not working your corporate job anymore. So what happened in between in those few years? How did you get to now you're flipping houses consistently?
So I wish I could say that, and then I got into rental investing and I completely replaced my W-2 income. That is not my story. The reality is, because I was traveling so much for work, I needed to be able to have the flexibility to be present more at home because my father got ill. And when I tell you, my corporate job was so beyond stressful. I worked around the clock because as a consultant, you're on site, you're in meetings. And here I am, 22 years old, really faking it till I make it. I mean, I literally taught myself to code because that wasn't my background. I was doing like free classes from MIT online. I mean, it was just a scramble. But, that being said, I just devoted my life to that job. And here I am. My father got ill. I'm at the hospital with him after he's in the hospital for months. And I'm here with 2 work laptops. I got my BlackBerry like glued to my hand. I'm like trying to do all the things. I'm like trying to catch a flight. I mean, it was absolute chaos. And I thought to myself, wow, like, is this really what I want to be doing in 5 years? And I asked myself that question and I remember the moment so vividly. And I thought to myself, absolutely not. I was working myself into the ground, trying to trip over myself and prove myself. I mean, I was the youngest female employee at a company that had offices in over 35 countries. Like everybody doubted my ability. I was constantly trying to prove myself. I was exhausted. I was so burnt out. And so then I thought to myself, okay, well, if I don't want to do it in 5 years, then why not make that change now? And that still didn't get me to real estate. I found my job at the time to be very unfulfilling. And so I thought, given my father's circumstance, I was actually going to go back to school, which I did. And I was going to become a neurologist. And then sometime later, I decided at my age that I didn't want to, well, A, get into like minimum of $250,000 in medical school debt.
Right.
You know?
Oh, yeah.
And I didn't want to be still like now, like in residency, grinding away. And it's so funny because the reason I started flipping houses, and it was as simple as this. My mother was visiting me, sitting on the couch, and she said, "Why don't you just flip houses?" And that was the first time I ever thought of real estate as a potential full-time path. And from that point, I was like, you're right. I'm going to bet on myself. I'm going to go all in. And that's what I'm going to do. I didn't grow up with like no one in my family necessarily has started businesses or has that sort of entrepreneurial drive. Both of my parents had spent their entire careers at the same companies. Like no job change, that job security, that sort of boomer mentality of going out on your own is riskier than, working for somebody else. It's just, and I don't have that mindset. So I just bet on myself, and it was the best decision I've ever made in my life.
I love that so freaking much. I also so here's the funny thing is I love that you technically flipped a couple houses, right? But still it didn't click, right? And so a similar thing happened to me where I'd purchased my first house. And even though I was living for free, I all of my living expenses were coming from the rent that I was getting from my property. It still hadn't clicked for me because I was still in the mentality of I need to have $10,000 a month in cash flow in order to quit my job and actually go do the thing that I needed to do. But realizing wait a minute, do I? Why do I need the only reason I say I need $10,000 a month cash is because everyone says they need $10,000 a month cash flow.
How did that come the normal number? Why is that the thing? I don't know how that became popularized because let me tell you what, there are many years of my life where I have lived well below $10,000 a month. Perhaps people are just trying to replace their W-2 income and maybe they're bringing in roughly that amount. I have no idea where that common, acceptable number came from, but I think it's totally attainable way before that.
Oh, and I mean, I think about when I was in college, which was less than 2 years before that, I was living on scraps, just doing just fine, having the best time of my life, right?
Yes.
It's so crazy too, because even just it's the transitioning to that mindset of wait, I can do this. I don't need $10,000 a month right now. Maybe I just need to transition and really go all in on something, and I'll end up getting to $10,000 a month if that's something that you want. Probably even more than that, right? It's so possible and so I'm not going to say easy because easy is relative, right? But I would say so easy to get to more than $10,000 a month, right? Of cash flow, or either through real estate or through a business. But for so many people, there's that block that's I must get to that number. And it's just wait, why though?
Yeah. I mean, I had quit my job knowing that I was going back to school. So that sort of idea was never even in my mind. You know what I'm saying? So I wasn't trying to, work my way up to that goal with a side hustle or additional rental property or anything. I just realized, okay, I'm going to pivot again. We tried one thing. Then we tried something else. We're going to pivot and then we're going to run with this idea. And so, I mean, it did take a lot of personal sacrifice because I had been a student for quite some time from leaving my corporate job. And I mean, I was already an adult at this point. It's not like I had help from family or anything like that. And so I did have to sell my home and take that equity. And, I knew so little. I did not know what private money was. And because I had been a student, I wasn't bankable. I couldn't get conventional financing on something else. I did not know how to raise private capital at the time. I didn't even know that was a thing. There was so much I didn't know. I mean, I'll tell you what, if anyone is listening to this podcast right now, you already know way more than I did when I started investing. So I promise you, it is totally possible. And so I remember it and I not only had to take out all of the cash from the sale of that home, but I used that cash to buy the property. And I had such a tight budget for renovations and all of the holding costs that come with flipping houses that I did almost all of the work myself. I mean, I didn't live in the property, but when I tell you I was there before sunrise and I was there after sunset every single day, 7 days a week until I got it done, like that was the case. But I just knew I didn't have a plan B.
Yeah.
And so plan A had to work. And I was going to do anything I had to do if that meant little sleep and constantly working, like physical labor that it's not like I knew how to do any of that stuff before. I mean, I'm fully self-taught, like in the DIY space, but you just figure it out when that's your only option.
Completely. And I love that you basically decided it was going to work out. Because I think for so many people, especially when you do have that plan B in the back, it's like, well, maybe I'm not going to necessarily give it my all because I always have something to fall back on. But I will say, when you decide, when you're like, this has to work, you're going to make it work.
I wholeheartedly believe that. And I think, if you cannot fail, you will not fail because you will do everything within your power to make sure it works out. And I think if you just truly have that confidence within yourself and your own resourcefulness and your ability to pull off and sacrifice, if that's, nights out with friends, if that's, cutting back on eating out or whatever that may be for you, or, like no streaming subscriptions or whatever you need to do, just, make those sacrifices because they're temporary and what you're working towards is so much greater than all of those tiny little sacrifices you have to make in the interim. So
completely. Okay, well, so I remember when I first met you, I believe you were only really flipping one house a year and then for the rest of the year, you were kind of just doing your own thing and traveling around. So
that sounds probably pretty spot on.
So I guess, can you tell me just a little bit more about that season of life? Just because, especially with this podcast, a lot of people who are coming here to listen, it's all about using real estate investing and entrepreneurship to travel the world. And there's so many different ways to do it, right? So I guess if you can kind of touch on that period of your life, that would be awesome.
Absolutely. For a long time, because it took years to even become more knowledgeable about different financing options. So I was literally flipping one house. I mean, I needed money to live, right? So I was flipping one house, having the profit from that, but I also then needed to fund the next one. So I was just rolling those funds forward. And I got to a point where I'm like, okay, I can afford to have two going on at the same time. And I did that for a little bit, but I got to a point where it's like, okay, like I'm doing pretty well right now. So I'm going to just, move to Vietnam. Why not? So yeah, and that's the thing too, when you think about the fact that I purchased my first piece of real estate in 2012, and here we are, oh my gosh, it's hard to believe that we're already in 2024. And so, a lot of people would think, oh my gosh, you've been doing it that long and you've only flipped that many houses. But here's my thing. I'm not trying to have this crazy massive flipping operation. I am simply trying to fund the life I want. Yeah. And if that means one flip a year, because I want to live overseas for a while or travel around Southeast Asia or, whatever that means for you. But like, you don't have to have this massive operation or this huge built out team or all of these. You don't need to do so many projects. Like, I feel like social media, especially, it's like, oh, well, I'm not flipping 100 houses at a time, so I'm not successful. And it's right. Like, please. I mean, success means something different to everyone. But if I can take on one project that I will clear like $100,000 on, I will take on that project every day because I would rather take on that one project than have 5 projects going on simultaneously that maybe I'll make 20K a piece on. Like that is not my strategy. Like I go for home runs, which is also one of the reasons that I don't have a ton of deal flow because I'm very particular. Yeah. But I'm okay with that. I stay in my lane. I go with my gut. And, I'm not trying. I've gotten to the point where I'm like, I'm not comparing myself to anyone else. Like, as
No.
long as I know that with what I'm trying to do, I'm moving the needle forward and I am seeing success in, the projects I take on. It just doesn't have to be that complicated. It is very possible to invest, flip one house a year, like maybe do a couple. You don't have to. And just imagine what an additional $100,000 a year would do for you. I feel like that's really impactful for a lot of people. Even if you just did one flip on the side of, say, your W-2 job, or, there are so many different ways to go about it, but I've never necessarily had the desire to really scale a huge team and a huge operation because, the more moving parts and the more people I'm responsible for just makes it a little harder to travel on a whim like I so enjoy doing.
No, I completely 100% feel that. To my bones. Yeah. And that's the thing. I think at the end of the day, it's really just figuring out what works for you. Some people, I have mentors who love scaling large teams, and it's amazing to see, and all the people they're impacting. But then I think about my business, any of my businesses, and I love the small, tight-knit team. I don't want to have 15 people to manage. I honestly don't even want more than 4 people to manage. I want as few people as possible that I have to interact with on a consistent basis, because my life also isn't just real estate. It's not just the business. It's not just the coaching program. I love spending time with my family and literally not looking at my phone or going on trips with my friends and turning everything off and not having to do anything other than enjoy being out while I'm traveling. And I think that what people don't realize too is you can still make a crap ton of money without scaling a huge team.
I couldn't agree more. I could not agree more. And yeah, I think you just have to kind of define what your strategy is and how you're going to do that. In your case, those short-term rentals, you've got everything down to a science. Things run smoothly. In my case, I now have gotten to the point where the team I consistently work with, we've got our systems, processes, and expectations down. So I feel comfortable enough that I can leave town and know that work is being done on site and things aren't going, wrong left and right. You know what I'm saying? Because with the flip, there's many things that can happen, especially with unoccupied properties and all the materials, and especially flipping in areas that are on the cusp of
transitioning.
Yes. Things happen. There's vandalism there. Things will always come up, but I think when I started, I never really even thought of those things, and I just figured it out as I went. And I know that's not necessarily great advice, but I think sometimes, you can only prepare and plan and listen to all the podcasts and read all the books for so long, because ultimately none of that makes any difference if you don't take action. Completely. I honestly think you just have to have so much self-confidence in your own ability to figure it out and make it work, no matter what the potential sacrifices maybe. You just got to figure it out. Have confidence in yourself, take that leap of faith, and I promise you, if you wholeheartedly believe that a deal or an investment is going to work out, it will.
No, I actually think that is the best advice you could possibly give. That is exactly what I tell people as well, because really at the end of the day, I honestly would prefer to have someone who hasn't studied every single BiggerPockets book and looked into every single thing and is just in analysis paralysis, but has all this knowledge. I would rather just have someone who's ready to freaking go. Let's just get into it. Yes. Get started.
Yes. I swear to you, I don't even think I had heard of BiggerPockets until I was maybe on my 4th property. I don't even know. But I'm just I guess I'm flipping houses. Oh, so flipping, selling a house within a year, that's flipping a house. Okay, I guess I'm doing that. I knew nothing.
I love that so much. Oh my goodness. Okay, so I guess for you, what would you consider is your zone of genius?
Oof. This is a tough one. I was thinking about this question the other day. And in terms of something I excel at that I think maybe I take for granted sometimes because it comes naturally to me. Well, first of all, relentless energy to figure it out. I am resourceful at like I will go above and beyond and get scrappy as hell to figure it out. Like, we are not failing. This is going to be profitable. I don't care if we're over budget. We will figure it out.
Yep.
So definitely relentless energy to push forward even when obstacles arise. And then I think for me, to this day, I get my best deals off of the MLS, which is crazy because a lot of people think, oh, there's no good deals on the MLS because everyone has visibility to them. Well, let me tell you what, not everyone has vision and can see potential. And that's really one of my strengths is being able to, just like the looked like a fishing camp French Quarter condo I purchased for 145 that had been on the market for 540 days or something, that had already appraised for nearly 70 grand more before I even renovated it. Like that investment, like it was free for the taking. You know what I'm saying? But not everyone has that vision. You know, not everyone can see potential. And I think that's certainly one of my strengths, which is also, I'm a very visual person. So I certainly enjoy the design aspect, seeing potential, and yeah, just making it work.
Completely. And so for anyone who's also listening, one of literally my favorite books, and I read it right before I even got started in real estate. I think I got it while I was studying to get my real estate license. Everything is Figureoutable by Marie Forleo. It's such a good book. I have all of my students read it. It's like mandatory reading at this point because it's just so true. Everything really is Figureoutable. You're not going to die. Like you will figure it out. If you are determined, you're going to figure it out.
No, I completely agree. I haven't read that book. I will add that to my list of books to read. You know, that list is really long.
Yeah.
I'll add it to the list.
Oh, endless.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. You know, and people are so scared at failing, but really, okay, so say something goes wrong and maybe things don't go quite as you had planned. But you know so much more now than you did before. You do not learn from success. You learn from failing, which I really hate that term. I wish we could like flip the script on it because it's like a first attempt in learning. You know what I'm saying? It's like you shoot your shot. Yeah, you're not failing. Like, good for you. You took action. That is the biggest thing, you know, and you learn so much. I wish people had a bit more confidence in their own ability to figure things out. And I think because at the time I didn't know what I didn't know, I was so naive to literally every component of real estate investing that I didn't have those doubts in my mind.
Yeah.
And so I would certainly tell people to focus, decide on one thing, either stick with one coach or one program, but really try to have your blinders on because when you're starting out, it is so easy to get overwhelmed. It is so easy to get overwhelmed.
Yep. No, I totally agree. And this is the recommendation I make for everyone. When you are hiring a coach or signing up to work with a coach, choose someone who's actually living the type of life you want to live, right? Because I know I've caught myself in that situation. It's like you kind of get that shiny, like, oh, this big person and they're doing awesome stuff and they look super successful. But then when I actually get to like know them and how their business runs, I'm like, oh, wait, I don't want that. You know?
Been there, done that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think also too with coaching, like I think the community you're building is so valuable because I think we would both agree that it's still quite intimate, right?
Yeah.
And it's still, you get that one-on-one attention. And, you know, if you're on social media and you're looking at real estate, you are absolutely getting pushed all of this sponsored content by some of these larger gurus and coaches. And then you pay for, say, this course or this coaching, and you're in a program with thousands of students.
Yeah.
And it's really overwhelming, not just to ask questions, but to get any sort of attention it's a whole thing, but it's really hard to sort of hone in on what opportunity is right for you. But I absolutely agree in terms of picking someone that is already living the life that you aspire to live.
Completely. Well, this was awesome. So we are just about ready to wrap up here, but I'm going to ask you the 3 questions that I ask every single person. And I say every single person, even though this is the first time we're doing this, but every single person who comes here on Wanderlust Wealth Show. So the first one is, what does your ideal perfect day look like?
Oh my goodness. Okay, are we thinking like work day or just any day?
Any day. Let's go with any day.
Okay, well, I would say an ideal day would be waking up in a beautiful location, preferably somewhere new, somewhere very far away, surrounded by a gorgeous landscape, and knowing and having peace of mind that I am making money in the background while I am literally living my best life in a gorgeous place. And knowing and having peace of mind, knowing that I mean, had taken the time to put in the right people and processes to ensure that that can happen. Because there's nothing worse than the stress of, having to put out fires and have all of these distractions when you're away. But travel is a huge part of that.
Yeah. I love that. You know what it kind of reminds me of? Lake Atitlan.
Yes.
That was magical. Best trip.
Wasn't it?
It's so wonderful.
I know. And I had been renovating a property and it was going well. You had Airbnb bookings going in.
Yep.
And it was great.
We're like, this is the life.
Yes, okay, we're on to something here. We got to keep this going.
I love that. Okay, question number 2. What is your mantra if you have one?
Goodness. I can't really say that I necessarily have a mantra, but maybe I'll steal yours. Yeah. Everything is figureoutable. I truly believe that. When there's no plan B, guess what? We're going to rally the troops and we're going to figure out plan A and we're going to make it work. I really do think, especially when you're getting started, you just have to remind yourself that those initial sacrifices that you may have to make if things don't go perfectly, which they won't, that it's all temporary. Everything is figureoutable and it will all work out in the end.
Completely. And so question number 3, what does wealth mean to you?
Wealth to me. It's funny because of course people think of wealth and then they think of the synonym money. That is not my vibe. That is not what it means to me.
Yep.
As I've been investing for some time now, I think, well, first of all, health is most important because without that, wealth means nothing.
Yep.
And for me, it's really about, having success in investing buys back my time. Mm-hmm. And time freedom, just in the reason I quit my corporate job because I needed more time to spend with my father. I like to have more time to show up for the people I love the most. That is the biggest thing for me. Just living a full, balanced, enjoyable life and being able to take care of the people I love, give back to the causes I enjoy. It's such a blanketed question, but it certainly is not the amount of money in my bank account.
No, I love that. I think that was absolutely perfect. I know we both resonate a lot in terms of, what we're trying to accomplish in life. So I absolutely love that. Well, this has been truly wonderful. It's been I feel like this is honestly the first time we've really dug into some of these questions.
I think so. I know.
Well, perfect, Hilary. And I guess where can anyone find you if they maybe wanted to learn a little bit more about flipping?
Absolutely. So right now, the best way to reach me is through Instagram. I do personally respond to all of my messages. So it's at Hilary Rose Huffman, and that's Hilary with 1 L. So if you want to reach out to me there, I'm an open book. I can't tell you how many calls a week I take from random strangers and we just talk for an hour and a half and talk about flipping. I'm an open book. And what I love, honestly, more than most things is helping other people get started and answering questions because I've been there. And when you're getting started, you just need someone to answer that question, get you that one little step forward, And so I'm here for that. If anyone has any questions about flipping or how to get started.
Love it. Well, thank you so much, Hilary. This was amazing.
Thank you, Olivia. This has been such a blast. I feel like we just hung out. I love this.
Truly. Thank you so much for listening to Wanderlust Wealth Show. Now, don't forget to follow the podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you love this episode, it would literally mean the world to me if you shared this with a friend or a family member or literally like anyone off of the street. Like right now, go ahead, share it so you don't forget, or post it on social media and make sure to tag me. I love seeing what you're listening in on and what you resonated with, and I'm just so freaking thankful for you. I'm so freaking excited for you. I love you, and don't forget, life really doesn't have to be hard.